You didn't start off in life riding a bicycle.
Right.
You started off learning to crawl, and then you learned to walk. And then you learned how to ride on a bicycle with training wheels. And then you did the bicycle with 2 wheels. And all those things lead up, those various steps lead up. Well, it's just the same thing. I don't care if you're talking about woodworking, you're talking about knitting, you're talking about sewing.
Scratch Entrepreneur. True stories of remarkable people who dropped everything to turn an idea into a healthy, profitable business. Hey, this is Jeremy Goodrich, owner of Shine Insurance Agency and the host of Scratch Entrepreneur, obviously, because we're here. I'm here today with Margaret Fette, owner of The Tailored Fit. We've seen each other. We've been around town in Bloomington many times, chatted before, and she just has a really neat story from long ago, growing up, to how she started The Tailored Fit. And we're going to really dig into that story in our conversation today. So, Margaret, thank you so much for spending a little time with us.
Well, thank you for inviting me. It's really quite exciting to be here.
Cool. So I want to start with podcasting. Do you listen to podcasts
all the time?
Oh, cool. Okay. Can you pick one podcast that you're listening to right now that maybe listeners don't know about and would really love?
Well, if they're in the sewing world,
okay,
they're going to really love Threads Magazine's podcast.
Oh, sweet.
It's amazing. They do a really Class A job with it. It's very well done. It's a big favorite of mine. If you're looking for a business podcast that maybe you haven't heard about, the Entre Leadership Dave Ramsey podcast is super, super good. Now, he's not on it.
Okay.
He has Ken Coleman doing
part of his network,
right? Like he's like the you know. Yeah. So he interviews all these different people who have generally seems like a lot of times they have written books.
Okay.
So they've written these really cool business books, and they have amazing stories to tell, much more interesting than mine. But they're really cool stories, and they then bring in the whole idea of what can they do to help that small business owner.
That's really cool.
It's really helpful stuff. I usually sit there with a notebook and like try to write stuff down if I'm not sewing. A lot of times I listen to them while I sew. It's a very nice way to sew and kind of keep your mind occupied with something while you're doing. A lot of my sewing work, I'm doing something I've done many, many times. So listening to the podcast is a really nice way to fill that time up, and so your head isn't just maybe going off into, I don't know,
just whatever. Yeah,
right,
and I think with an entrepreneur podcast, you feel like you're being productive, and I don't think that's the only reason to listen to podcasts. I love to not be productive when I listen to podcasts too, but when I listen to entrepreneur podcasts, sometimes I like run on the treadmill at night, and it's like, okay, well, I'm doing something good for my body, and I'm doing something good for my business because I'm listening to this podcast. So what was the Dave Ramsey group one?
Entre Leadership.
Entre Leadership, and then what was the sewing one?
Threads Magazine.
Threads Magazine. Okay, cool. 2 great podcasts that folks can listen to if they don't already know about those.
Yes.
That sounds awesome. I want to go backwards a little bit. And now you love to sew. You own a business here in Bloomington that helps other people learn how to sew, get better at sewing, find sewing supplies, and even sewing machines.
That's true.
When you look back at being a kid or maybe growing up, was there some story from that time that you say, wow, that's what sparked my interest in this world?
Well, my story coming up through sewing is a really different one than a lot of people I hear. Huh. My mom apparently was an amazing seamstress, but she died when I was 5.5. I don't remember her. So I'm thinking that I probably saw her sewing, but I don't really remember any of that.
Yeah.
But apparently she used to make her own coats, dresses. I mean, she was quite accomplished. And when I was in my early, 10 to 12 area of my life, I was interested in sewing. But of course, at that age, most of the time, if you've not sewn up to that point, the first thing someone gives you is hand sewing work.
Sure.
So I learned how to embroider and do what's called crewel work. It's working with wool yarn and making designs that are basically embroidery designs.
It's not because it's cruel to have to do
That's
it.
That's right,
okay.
exactly.
Right.
And so I learned how to do that, and I became quite accomplished at it. By the time I hit about 14, I am like really jonesing for a sewing machine.
Yeah.
This seems like the next thing I want to do.
You realize that sewing machines are the next step. You've been doing the hand sewing and the crewling. And
yes.
Did I get that right?
No, it's just called crewel work.
Oh, okay.
It's fine. It's fine.
Yeah. And so you really want
I'm
that
like
machine.
really wanting this sewing machine because I know that then I can like construct clothes. And my dad had remarried by this point in time. I had a stepmom who had not one domestic bone in her body. And so she's like, I have no idea what you do with a sewing machine, but they went and bought me a Little Singer sewing machine, and I tried, but there wasn't really anyone there to help me. Mm-hmm. And so the first,
did you find like a patterns? Did you just take cloth and figure it out? Like,
I took a piece of cloth and I actually made the pattern up myself. Huh. And at that age, you're not really thinking about the fact that bodies are three-dimensional. I was used to paper dolls. Uh-huh. So I made the pattern pieces so that it would have fit somebody who was a flat body.
Right, that makes sense. It totally wouldn't work at all.
And it really would have fit a paper doll, but it did. I tried to make a pair of pajamas for my stepmom.
Wow.
And so that was my first sewing project. It was a total fail, but it was really a cute story when you think about it,
Absolutely.
and you go back and you look at that and you go, and my stepmom to this day, she just shakes her head when she thinks about when she pulled these out, and like nobody could have ever fit in these clothes.
So you gave it to her as like a present
yes,
for Christmas
I wrapped
or something
it up
like
for
that?
Christmas
So
and
sweet.
did that. So that was kind of a like, oh, I guess this isn't working. And it didn't occur to me at that age, because really not having anyone who did crafts or any kind of thing, I didn't really know where to go to find out how to sew.
Yeah, right.
So fast forward, I'm 21 years old. I find out that I'm going to have my son. Uh-huh. And I also find out that I apparently don't like being pregnant. I was in bed 7 months out of 9.
So your body doesn't like being pregnant.
Yeah, it really did not like being pregnant.
Right.
It
So
was,
you're kind of stuck.
I was really stuck.
That's terrible, yeah.
And I had moved from Pennsylvania, where I grew up. I had moved to Indiana. Mm-hmm. Now, in Indiana, my ex-husband's family had people who knew how to sew. And so what I decided was that I was going to put this time to some use, because when they say bed rest, what they really mean is you're just not supposed to be up doing a lot of things. Yeah. You can sit. I asked for Christmas that year for a sewing machine. Mm-hmm. And my parents bought me a little Kenmore home sewing machine, and I tried making a maternity outfit. And
which is a complicated thing to make, right?
If
you have the wrong fabric or whatever.
That was my first introduction to wrong fabric for the pattern, and not knowing how to fit myself. I'm 5'2", and I'm kind of a curvy girl. And patterns, when you pull them out of the envelope, are not really styled for Margaret's size. So I actually was able to follow on the instructions. I actually constructed a fairly well-constructed garment. Yeah. It didn't fit me at all. And the fabric looked ridiculous with the pattern. Sure. And so I was like, oh my gosh, why does this have to be so hard? So I'm thinking, I love sewing. I want to do something. And somebody introduced me to quilting.
Yeah, absolutely.
So by the time that I was 31, I had joined 7 different quilt guilds. I was teaching quilting up and down the East Coast at craft schools. I was making crafts and selling quilts at quilt shows and doing commission quilts. And then by 31, I had made about 1,000 quilts.
Wow. And so at that point, when you were pregnant and you were on bed rest and you had got the sewing machine, made your own clothing, and you were just like, this is just not working. This is what's wrong. I love the sewing part, but the making clothes isn't working. You turned to quilting as the solution and fell in love with it.
That was it. And the really cool thing about quilting, and for someone who's just starting off in sewing clothes can be very daunting because of the fitting part of it. Yeah. But if you start with something like quilt blocks or just doing a little baby quilt or something like that, the neat thing is it's flat. You don't have to fit it around a body, and you can learn technical skills that you can pass on to doing once you're ready to embark on clothing.
Yeah.
For instance, now when I teach sewing to people and I'm getting them into clothes, I introduce them to fitting right at the very beginning.
And what is fitting, how you know how it fits a certain size body or something like that?
That's right. Because even if you're doing something even as simple as like PJ pants, think of a little elastic waist, they've just got 2 legs, not anything real complicated. The fact of the matter is that if you aren't the typical size that the pattern's expecting, then even a pair of PJ pants won't fit you right.
Right.
I mean, someone like you or you probably wouldn't have them long enough if you didn't change the pattern. Yeah. If it's somebody like me, I got this curvy body. The front in the pants needs to be a little bit shorter than the back because I need a little more coverage back there, So, and it sounds like this all should, quote, make sense, but most of these patterns, they don't even show you how to change that.
Right.
And so I start people off right from the get-go, and because I want them to end up with something that they actually will wear. And granted, most of the time in a very beginning class, I actually do the changes for them. But at least they see them and they can get the idea of what they need to be looking for.
Here's the basic pattern, but just to let you know, it's never going to be the basic pattern unless you just have like a stick figure person. So here's how to adjust it. It's
very rare. Usually, it seems like to me for women's patterns, if you are having child, you will probably have the body style that you can do most of the stuff on a pattern. Yeah. But if you're not that person, if you're a little bit heavier, you're a little bit shorter, you're a little bit taller, all those things that I've been altering clothes for people for years in my tailoring business, those things apply to patterns because they're making it for a generic style. I mean, it's a mannequin essentially that they're building that pattern for. And if you don't have those dimensions, then that just doesn't work.
So the act of being able to realize that, number one, and then B, kind of, I don't know, number 1 and B, I don't think those things go together.
It's probably 1 and 2.
1 and 2. So, and then number 2, knowing how to adjust that thing. If it's adjusting the back end a little bit more, if it's adjusting how long it is or how short it is, or, that's adjustments are maybe level 2 of clothing.
It is. The first thing you really need to have for sewing is the skills to know how to sew a straight seam, how to take apart part of a seam and then connect to the parts that you've taken out a bit. So you have to go back over there and be able to restitch over an area. Once you can master the basic skills, it's like anything, when you didn't start off in life riding a bicycle.
Right.
You started off learning to crawl and then you learned to walk. And then you learned how to ride on a bicycle with training wheels. And then you did the bicycle with 2 wheels. And all those things lead up, those various steps lead up. Well, it's just the same thing. I don't care if you're talking about woodworking, you're talking about knitting, you're talking about sewing. Yeah. Those are all very, very similar things. And so when you want to learn how to sew, you need to learn how to wind a bobbin. You need to learn how to thread the sewing machine. Yeah. Then you need to learn how to do a straight stitch and so forth. And so what I try to do is build those skills. Yeah. But I want them to understand if they're not going to go the direction of doing something like a quilt, then if they're going to go the clothing direction, what I try to do is show them right from the beginning, it's not impossible. It's easy to do, but there are steps and you need to learn them.
And that's the hardest part sometimes is for anything. I mean, I have a 12-year-old and just like getting him to, if he wants to play saxophone or ride a skateboard, he just like expects to be able to, do that complete process right from the beginning. And I think we all have a little bit of that, right?
Oh, I think so.
As a teacher, one of the things you do, and I know you do really well, is to say, look, here's the whole picture. Here's how the steps work, like you just described. And, adults are probably a little easier to work with in that realization that, hey, you've got to start with point A before you get to point 10. Can I do that again? Or
you did that again.
But yeah, you've got to learn how to do this. And I think, kids, I was an elementary school teacher for a long time, and they just don't have as much of that concept. And so the better you can do as a teacher, whether it's adults or children, to say, look, here's the whole picture. Here's how you get from here to here. And if you're going to jump all these other steps, then you're going to be crappy at that thing. Maybe you know how to do it. Maybe you can kind of ride that bike, but you're never going to be able to ride it well.
Right, exactly. And so what I try to do is give them the basic building blocks to move up and be able to do those sort of things. But you do have people who want to just jump right in, and instead of, making a pair of PJ pants, they want to make a suit jacket. It's like
no way.
No.
Yeah, so I can
You're
use
just
a
going to
sewing
get frustrated.
machine. Yeah, and I'm at point B probably.
Okay.
I can use a sewing machine. I can roll a bobbin maybe sometimes. The one that goes underneath the underneath part.
That's the bobbin. It's winding the bobbin, which is you put that on the top of the machine generally is the winding part. And then you put it into the machine, and that's the bobbin. And the process of sewing, there's a top needle with thread in it, and then the bottom has a bobbin, and the needle pulls up that thread, and it creates an interlocking stitch, and that's what holds everything together.
And so two separate threads are working together.
That's
to
correct.
Make that.
That's correct.
And I did know that part of it. So,
there's some, if you go on my Facebook page, I have a wonderful little video that shows how that stitch is made, and it's a little animation thing. And so you can look at that, and it's really kind of interesting because the person who created a sewing machine was just brilliant. I mean, they came up with this really slick idea of this twisting and creating essentially a little knot to each one of these things, that little twist, and then it goes down and it creates another twist, and that's what holds everything all together. I mean, who thinks like that?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, that's really cool.
Well, and it's those steps again, like someone created what you just described, and then you have like sergers and things like that kind of take it to the whole next level, and now you have embroidery machines that can take a digital image and be
able to stitch it out onto them.
Happens.
Yeah. It's pretty fascinating.
Yeah.
And for people who don't know what a serger is, look inside any knit top you have, and where you see all those stitches that holding the side of your t-shirt together, that's the serger. That's what the serger does. Is it really finishes off everything nice and neat. It actually has a knife blade. It cuts off the extra fabric. It finishes the seam really well, and then all of a sudden you have a pretty nice looking garment from the outside. So
that's super cool. We're going to go to break in just a second.
Okay.
When we come back, you have a whole nother world that you kind of dug into, I'm assuming after this quilting conversation?
Actually, yes.
Okay.
Which is interesting because it seems like it should have happened before that, but it didn't.
Yeah. So in the world of sewing and creating in this scenario, you did a bunch of quilting. And then when we come back, we'll talk about the fascinating world you dove into right after that.
Thank you.
Scratch Entrepreneur is brought to you by Shine Insurance. At Shine, our goal is simple: to change the way you feel about insurance. Start that evolution today at shineinsurance.com. Hey, we're back with Margaret Fette, owner of the Tailored Fit. She just talked a little bit about kind of growing up, falling in love with the sewing machine, becoming a quilter, really, and over the course of your 20s, really doing the quilt thing to the point where you were traveling and showing your quilts and teaching other people how to make quilts and stuff like that.
I was.
And then you had a son, and he was kind of growing up, and you were deciding that you wanted to go back to school full time, right?
Right.
And so you went back and studied and got your degree.
I did. I went back and got a general studies degree. It was my bachelor's degree. But what I did with that general studies degree, because it was really my only option at that point in time, was I took every class they had on textiles in the fine arts department. I took every class they had in costuming. I took every class they had on sewing at IU at that time. And they had kind of like a couture sewing program at that point in time. And in fact, the teacher I went through at that point suggested I actually go work in a couture house in Paris.
So you were starting to move from this quilting idea over to
clothing.
The clothing and the fashion and the place that you had kind of delved into when you were younger, but you were kind of realizing that that was a passion and coming back to that, right?
Right.
So then did that materialize at any point?
It did. In that time frame when I was going to school, I was also working part-time doing alterations and tailoring work for people. And when I was doing all that, then I had gone through this program at IU, and I decided what I was going to do was go off to New York and work in Broadway costuming.
Huh. So costume and fashion, different things, right?
Very.
Why are they different?
They're different because when somebody makes a costume, and there's different kinds of costuming too, so this can get a little complicated, but think about it. When you think about Broadway costuming or maybe film costuming versus like your local theater production, those two things are like they're pretty much night and day. The people who work on Broadway, the people who work in the film industry, they're making things that not only look amazing, they also have to last through lots and lots of on and off, going through scenes, going through the person wearing it on stage. And they want those costumes to last for a really long time.
That makes sense. So the quality has to be much higher.
Amazing.
It seems like for really big movies, it potentially could feed over into the fashion world where sometimes film will drive some new fashion.
That's exactly true.
So there's probably some connection at the highest levels of costume in the movie world.
In the movie world, it's even to the place where sometimes they will pull a designer and say, we want a piece for this particular film production. But most of the time, what you're dealing with is a lot of the stuff on even film. There's so many extras and so much. There's a lot of really regular stuff too.
Right.
And even in the theater world, there's regular stuff. They will buy just things. They will look and see, what they can find from, your local retailers or not even local retailers. They'll even look online and see if something will fit for a particular member of a cast or something like that, especially if it's done in contemporary.
Right.
And then they might change it, or they might buy 6 of them because they know that they're going to be worn multiple times and so forth. And they want to have that thing available even once original piece after being cleaned so many times is worn out.
Yeah. So you went down the costume road.
I did.
And you went to New York and became a costume designer on Broadway, or what was your role?
No, I was not a designer. What I did was I was working on the technical end of it, doing sewing, and I was working in the costume shop constructing.
Cool.
And they have different words for this, but essentially I was a first hand, which meant that I worked directly with designers and I created what they wanted.
Created their pieces. So was there a specific show that sticks out as one that you really enjoyed being a part of and felt proud of the outcome?
Well, I got to work on most of the female lead costumes the year Jekyll and Hyde opened up. Okay. I believe that was in 99. I actually got to design a piece for it too. They let me design one piece
cool.
for
Can
it.
You describe that piece a little bit? It was
butterfly wings, essentially, for one of they had a scene in a brothel, and they made these kind of like almost butterfly wings that went on several of the characters, and I got to do one of those. The designer had created one and said, you just go ahead and do the other one. So
that's cool.
That was kind of neat, and I enjoyed doing that. The costume shop I worked for, I found out just recently, does not exist anymore. It was called Corelli Costumes, and they used to do almost all the female leads for all the historical kind of shows on Broadway. So I'm really sad to hear that world is changing apparently pretty dramatically right now.
What was the type of piece that you liked making the best? What kind of character was the one that when you heard this was one you'd be working on, you're like, I'm going to nail this?
I always have enjoyed working in period pieces. I've always had a thing for doing historical costuming, and even personally, I enjoy that. I'm real fond of this whole idea of the steampunk thing. I love that. I think that's really fun. And I like costumes. I think costumes are really fun and wonderful. And I like the idea of being able to create cosplay stuff interests me, you know? So, I mean, being able to create these whimsical characters.
So is it the fabric, or is it the character that's sort of the outcome of is it multiple pieces put together? Like, what is it that you like about that particular type of costume?
I think it's the attention to detail and the being able to really pull together all these beautiful fabrics and trims and techniques. And you can just do, I mean, one of the things that we worked on with these pieces for Jekyll and Hyde, because it was all set in the late 1800s, was all these really amazing full dresses that had gorgeous pleated bottoms on them. And they were like ruffles on the bottoms. Yeah. And we had a lot to do with putting that all together. And it was really quite, I mean, they were just extraordinary. They were made out of these luxurious fabrics that anybody would just dream to wear. And it just made you feel elegant and just from another century. So,
and you, I assume, got to see the actors putting those outfits on and feeling the experience.
No.
Of it.
And it's a really sad thing. You know, when you work on Broadway, you don't typically get tickets to the shows. You don't typically, I mean, not in the capacity I was working. I mean, maybe if I was the show designer, I would get them, but I didn't in the capacity I was working at. I was fortunate at the time that I was able to go some of those shows. But most of the time, you didn't see the actors or actresses even in them. The designers would, once things were constructed, they would actually take the pieces to another place and the fittings were done there. They would come back, and if anything needed to be changed, we just never saw any of it.
So you didn't get to experience, like, because the picture I was having when I was imagining this beautiful period piece that you'd put together was like seeing the actress put it on and the feeling of, oh my God, I can't, you know, and maybe they don't, maybe it's all when you're doing it for a job.
And whenever I did get a chance to talk to an actor that was involved with one of these, they were so incredibly grateful for the work that we put into things. They were completely complimentary. I never ran into anybody. I'm sure there were people who weren't like that, but I mean, I always felt appreciated from that end if I did come across someone, but it was really rare. Really, just the only people that would like have that contact would be once the designer, you know, would go back and make sure the fittings were done. They might have one person that was helping them with that, but we never saw any of it. And I think that kind of led to me feeling ultimately, I mean, I was putting 60 hours a week in while I was working there, and there got to be a place where work had slowed down, and the woman who owned the shop, she wanted me to stay. She liked my work. She appreciated what I did, but she was getting ready to lay off people, and I raised my hand. I was like, this isn't fun. I'm not getting to interact with people. I like people. I've always enjoyed interacting with, you know, my customers and clients and in students and things like that. And this was like, I know a lot of people who like to sew professionally who are very, what I would say are very introverted.
Yeah.
And it is. It does. It makes a lot of sense.
It's a very personal act. I mean,
right. There's just not a lot of interacting most of the time with other people in this. But I wasn't ever that person. I was the person who always loved to be connecting with someone and being able to solve their problem and being able to help them. And to go there and like work in this situation where literally almost nobody in the shop ever talked to each other. You were expected to sew like a mad person all the time. There really wasn't any interaction. It kind of felt like a sweatshop to me. And
it didn't fit your personality.
Not at all. And I also didn't have any control over anything. All I got
creative control or otherwise.
None. Yeah. And so for me, that was kind of tough, you know, so I wasn't, and I decided, well, if I'm going to do something, maybe it would be better. I thought I would maybe stay in New York, and I started making samples for people who were doing design work, fashion design work.
On the fashion side, not the costume side.
And I started doing a little bit of that, but then I got a call and I had some family stuff happen, and I ended up back in Indiana. And so came back to Indiana in 2000, and I've been basically here ever since. And 2001, I opened up my own alterations tailoring business out of my home. 5 years later, I had basically taken over half the house. And I was starting to need people to work with me. And it wasn't working out of that venue anymore. And so I decided to open up a retail place. And I did that in 2006.
Okay. So we're going to take a quick break. And then I want to talk about that. I want to talk about your retail space. Was it the Tailored Fit at that point?
It became the Tailored Fit at that point.
Okay, cool. And so I want to talk about business ownership. I want to talk about some of the things that have gone wonderfully, some of the things that maybe were struggles and probably still are. I'd like to just talk business.
There's never any struggles in business.
So when we come back, we'll talk a little bit of business with Margaret Fette. Hey, Jeremy here. Quick ad for Shine Insurance. And what I'm going to do again is talk about a claim and how to handle it. I think for your business, I want to talk about a coverage that you should definitely have, and that is called loss of income coverage. And what happens is if you have a business and you cannot do business because of a covered claim, water came pouring through your ceiling at your restaurant, and suddenly your restaurant is closed for 2 weeks, there is coverage in your policy for the lost income for that period of time. You should check right now and make sure you have that coverage. So if you're ever in that situation, your insurance policy covers the lost income during that period of time. All right. If you need any more information about your business insurance, feel free to check us out, shineinsurance.com. Now let's get back to the show. All right, we're back with Margaret Fette again. Margaret, thank you so much for joining us.
It's been a pleasure.
So you started your Tailored Fit business in 2005, you said, right? Or you started a little bit before that, but really
2001 started out of my house as Fashions by Margaret.
Cool.
And then I moved the business into a retail location in January of 2006.
Okay.
I decided when I did that if I was ever going to be able to pass the business on to anybody else, that it needed to have some other name attached to it than just mine.
Yeah, that was smart, I think.
And so I called it the Tailored Fit. And so the Tailored Fit has been an alteration tailoring custom sewing shop for up until here we are at 2018. And 2 years ago, we added the University of Sewing, which is our educational arm. And that was meant to be just teaching sewing. And then the next thing I knew, this past year, I had so many of my students bringing in horrible, terrible sewing machines. I mean, just horrible machines.
That they had been handed down?
No, they are buying them off of, they're purchasing them, but they're inexpensive and they are made by name you would totally recognize and you would think that it would be a good sewing machine, and it's not.
What makes a bad sewing, what makes a bad sewing machine versus a good sewing machine?
Well, a bad sewing machine is going to have lots of plastic parts, maybe even to the point of the computer elements sitting on essentially a sheet of plastic. And sewing machines run at a very high rate of speed. They create a lot of heat and a lot of friction. Well, if you have a piece of plastic in the center of the machine that's supposed to be holding all the parts that make the machine work, if you think about this even for a moment two, but most people don't think about that. They don't think about that engineering. Why would they? They see that name that has been the pinnacle name in sewing machines forever. We've all thought that they were wonderful sewing machines. Well, they were up until about 1980. And in 1980, they were bought out and they were all starting to be manufactured in Asia. And those machines became more and more filled with plastic pieces and plastic parts, even to the point where their bobbins are plastic. And sadly, they only end up being a good machine for probably 6 months to a year. And so while it sounds great that you can buy a machine for $100, what you're buying for $100 is something that is not going to probably give you more than a year's worth of use. So that's not a really, and it'll make you hate sewing, which is just an awful thing. And that's really what I was getting upset with, is that I would have people who bring me things and they were trying to sew and the machine was just messing up constantly. And
then you just hate it and you don't know why. The tools, it's like tools in any business or any hobby. So how could someone, we're supposed to be talking about business right now, but I want to know how How can someone who's buying a sewing machine, I know you don't want to say like the brand, but like how can they know the difference? Like what is it, just price or?
It isn't just price. Price does play into it because you're not going to get a really decent sewing machine that you could pass down to your kid for less than $500. You're just not going to be able to buy that.
So that's like a marker.
That's kind of a marker.
Yeah.
It really is. And so the thing about it is, does it have metal bobbins? The area where the bobbin case goes into, is that metal? Is the machine solid feeling? If you can pick the machine up and it feels like it's less than 5 pounds, I'm guessing it's probably made with a bunch of plastic in
Right.
it. Either that or unless it's really super expensive and they're making everything, what is it, titanium these days that's really light. You know, I mean, those are going to be your choices. There's going to be different things.
Yeah. But so you probably can talk about a couple of brands that you sell because obviously you're selling quality. What are some of those brands?
Well, and we do sell some machines that are in that $100 to $200 range. We have a Burnett that Bernina makes, and it is got a lot of plastic parts, but the main part of the machine, the structure, the skeleton of it is metal.
Right.
And the bobbin area, it's metal.
It's the best you can do at that price point.
That's right. And then we have another one that for really good for kids. And I mean, the Burnett's a good kid machine, and so is the Everstone. They're both basically made by Bernina, but what they've done is they've taken the best things that they can do, but put it in a package with it only has specific stitches available to it. It doesn't have a lot of bells and whistles, but it's a great beginner, great entry-level sewing machine. And you can get those. We're having a sale for Black Friday, and people, if you're listening to this after January, that won't make any, use to you, but we're going to have one of our Burnett's at $125. But it's not normally that price. It's normally $200, but it's going to be for 6 days. It's going to be, $125. So it's a great buy for that.
Decent stuff in there.
If you're doing the entry level thing, you just want something to see if this is what you like to do, or you're having it for someone, 12 to 16. This is a great time to get that.
Yeah. And no matter when you're listening, probably connecting with you and seeing what the scenario is at that point would make a lot of sense.
Right. And if you're really someone who likes to sew, get a good metal framed sewing machine that does not have a drop-in bobbin.
Okay.
The drop-in bobbin, they make the way that the thread comes off of that, it wobbles. And so you'll not get good stitch quality. But if you have the ones that load in from the front, it's like an old-fashioned sewing machine. If it loads in from the front, it's going to be a much better quality sewing. And these are the kinds of problems I see people having with their sewing machines.
I mean, bobbins are the thing I have a problem with all the time.
Right. The fact of the matter is usually you just need to practice putting them in properly and know how they're supposed to.
I'm pretty sure I'm not doing that.
And people also don't realize that your bobbins are machine specific.
Yeah.
So if you have a machine, your bobbin is specific to your machine. So you can't just go and come into my shop and you own, say, a Kenmore sewing machine. My bobbins might not fit your machine. They might, but they might not.
You want to be careful as you
So
figure
if
that
you
out.
have a machine, bring in your bobbin and I can make sure you get the right bobbin.
Okay.
I've used every brand of machine I think that's ever been made. I know a lot about sewing machines. I can clean and oil them. I can make sure that they're not typical, normal kinds of problems. If you're having a problem with your machine, I can see at least if it's not something that's just easy to fix.
Yeah. And that kind of brings me to this idea of, and I have a local business that is in an industry that someone could just go out to, wherever and get the product or try and go that direction. You have a local business where people have a similar choice. It's like, do I want service as a part of my buying process, right? And do I want like someone who can help me make sure the bobbin is in the right place or make sure the right stuff is there? Do you see a conflict between the business that you're doing here locally and people making buying decisions, going out and kind of buying the wrong thing because they just don't have any advice on it?
It happens all the time. It happens on everything from buying clothes that they bring into alter to having someone buying a sewing machine and then coming to me and saying, I want you to teach me to use it. And I'm like, Well, I can, and I'll do that, and I'm happy to do that. But I can tell right now you're the type of person who, really wants to use this.
Yeah.
And if you really want to use it, let me at least talk to you about what we have. If you have someone you love and you know they want a sewing machine, just come and have a conversation with us. I'm not going to be mad at you if you buy it from someone else.
Yeah,
but honestly, at least, get what you need. It's one of the big things that I've tried to model my entire business. I don't care if we're talking about tailoring, alterations, custom sewing, sewing classes, sewing machines, whatever it is. I try to help the person get what they actually want. And because at the end of the day, if I do that, you're going to remember me and you're going to come back and see me for something else, even if you don't buy that thing right now.
And at the end of the day, it just feels good too.
Well, I got to get up and look at myself in the mirror. Some people don't seem to have an issue with that, but I really do. I don't want to wake up in the middle of the night and think, God, that was just really bad. I just don't. I'm not perfect. I've made mistakes along the way. Everybody has. But boy, it's really important to me that I'm helping people. I want someone to walk out of our store feeling really good about how they look, or really good about the machine they bought, or really good about the fabric purchase they made. I want them to feel good about all those things.
There are people out there, and maybe I should have them on sometime and hear where they're coming from, that aren't thinking from that perspective. That's like, I'm happy to help. But so many of us are thinking from that perspective. Like, I don't know. How do I help? Like, I'm just trying to live this life. I'm just trying to do like the best I can. How can I help people with the skills I have, the knowledge I have, the access to quality materials and quality machines that I have? And I don't know, the money comes second in some ways. I know I feel that way. And
it's obvious in my life. It is, so.
Yeah, and you gotta balance it, and sometimes you have to think a little bit more about the money than maybe you want to.
Right. Well, I think the biggest way that most of us should think about our money in our businesses is: are we making intelligent choices about the things that we're buying for our businesses? Are we making intelligent decisions about the hiring we're doing? Are we making that one I could talk about for 7 days with you. But all those kind of things, I think that actually can play as big of a role, if not bigger, to your bottom line than it does for worrying about, and of course, pricing things appropriately. That has to happen in there somewhere too. I'm the communications director for the Association of Sewing and Design Professionals. And guess what they do? They do what I do.
Absolutely.
So we talk about pricing all the time. I'm always fascinated when I hear people make whatever kind of comments about pricing. And when it comes to our tailoring and alterations end of our business. And what I will tell you is that the pricing you pay when you come in to see someone like me reflects that you're getting, just in me, over 30 years of experience. Yeah. What do you pay someone with over 30 years of experience who's an engineer or a lawyer or a insurance agent or a car mechanic or a woodworker? Just because I work in the sewing field does not mean that isn't, you're getting me to do something for you in probably a quarter the time that someone who doesn't know what they're doing is going to be.
And probably higher quality too.
Well, I can guarantee that.
and you experience that where people really judge alterations in particular as a price driven, like they balk at a certain price?
Certain people do.
Yeah.
I have clients who have been around long enough and have had alterations and tailoring done long enough that they know that if they want to have things done the way they want them done, that they want, someone who knows how to do those kind of quality alterations and tailoring. Okay, just for an example, I had a lovely young lady come to me, and this has been years ago. And she was 1 week out from her wedding, and she had let the neighborhood
it's already not
grandma
the perfect time to come to you.
Grandma who sews for everybody in the neighborhood.
Sure,
she worked out of a little bedroom in the back of the house, and no offense meant to those people at all. Some of them are quite good, but this particular gal had not really worked on wedding gowns, and she said she could do this job for her, and she took in the sides. This girl came to me with this dress that literally the fabric was kind of bunched up and tacked down on one side and done on the other side. And it looked like somebody who didn't know what they were doing and were really scared of that dress.
Wow.
Fortunately, she had not damaged it in any way.
So she hadn't cut it or actually so that you couldn't fix what was done.
I could fix what was done, but I see people like that more often than I'd like to tell you about.
It's probably more true in your industry, maybe because there's more people who like think they can do it, but really can't. But I think it's true across industries, right? Like there's folks who...
Well, the person who designed one website and thinks he can make a website for anybody.
Absolutely, yeah. Or design one logo or, any of that kind of stuff.
Right.
And as a business owner, we need stuff all... Like looking at that from the other side of it, as business owners, we need work done for us a lot. And so we're also on the other side of these decision-making processes where we're looking for people to provide services for us, and we have to see those same things, right?
Right.
And so there's always a decision, almost no matter what perspective you're coming from, where you've got to decide quality or price. Sometimes it's just that simple.
Right.
And then you also have to look a little bit deeper at your decision and see, well, what do I know about this person, this entity? Have I talked to them? Have I had previous experience with them? Do I have referrals from someone else who had a great experience with them? And that's how we find those service providers that we love. And man, a service provider that you love is such a great thing.
It is. It's pretty amazing. I can tell you over the years that, somebody who can fix my shoes well is my buddy, because I find shoes that I like and then I want to wear them forever, so those are the kinds of things. And so it's the same thing is true in my world. If you want someone who has years and years of experience, has worked on more wedding gowns than you've ever seen, has worked on more kinds of men's tailoring, because I started off in men's tailoring. I mean, that was where I learned how to do alterations and stuff. So I've been doing men's tailoring for 35 years. And I have a wonderful, excellent tailorer that works for me. It used to be that, I would look at my customer list, and now being in this business for 12 years as a retail location, I can't even begin to tell you how many items of clothing I've made, how many garments we've altered. I have no idea. It's in the many, many tens of thousands.
Wow.
So
you know your stuff.
I do.
And
I know how to fit people. And that is probably the biggest thing I bring to the table for almost anybody, because somebody might be excellent at sewing, but if they can't fit you properly, it doesn't really matter, because you're not going to get the results. So you need someone, and I have fitted more bodies than you can imagine. And I mean, how many can you imagine in 30 years? That's
a lot.
It's a huge amount.
Right?
It's a huge amount. And and I've worked with people from every extreme that you can imagine. And we welcome everybody. I mean, I've helped an awful lot of people end up with what they want, and doing it in a way that, like I said, it's so important to me that my customers walk out and they're happy with how things look and how they feel. And that's just a big deal. Having this many customers and this many times, yes, I've had a few people unhappy over the years.
Well, sure. But
but I would put the numbers who have been happy well in, skyscrapers above the ones who haven't been. So
cool. One last question before I let you share with folks kind of where they can find you if they want to. And that is, you've grown this business over the course of the last 14 years to the point where it has all these different elements to it. And you're, in a new building now in the last couple of years.
Big new building. We have 4,000 square feet.
Yeah. And eight employees, something like that. And so my question is, what does the tailored fit look like 5 years from now?
Hopefully the tailored fit looks like from 5 years from now is a point where maybe it is ready to be two different businesses.
You can split it off, because there are a lot of things there.
There's so much going on, and sometimes I feel like I need to clone myself. And I'm hoping that where we're going to be at is that there's going to be this wonderful sewing school and fabric store and place where anybody in the community can come in and just feel like that they can come in and hang out and sew, or they can take classes, and they have lots of things they can buy. and that we have classes all day long.
Yeah.
That would make me so happy.
Because people are coming to those classes, obviously. So that means you're bringing people in.
So that would be something that would make me really happy. And then the other part of it being this really vibrant, wonderful place for people to come in and get custom clothing and custom tailoring alterations work, and that those can operate independently of one another.
Okay.
That would be pretty cool.
Yeah, it sounds good, and you've got the space to do it, and that makes a lot of sense. So, Margaret, if folks want to find you, maybe they need some alterations of their clothing, maybe they are a quilter and just want to connect in that world, maybe they've never sewn before and they want to kind of learn how to do that, where can they find you?
Okay. First place, if you go on to the internet and go to thetailoredfit.com, you can find a whole bunch of information right there. But if you want to stop by and see the shop, we're at 611 West 11th Street. We're in the old Bender Lumber Building, 1 block west of Upland Brewery in Bloomington, Indiana. And we're at 812-323-2665. And we have an Instagram account too.
Okay. Margaret.
Facebook account too. All those things.
Instagram, Facebook, all the stuff.
Oh, trying to keep up with all that stuff. Man, is a lot of work.
Well, it's been awesome chatting with you. I've enjoyed just listening to your story and what you're doing, and I love the work that you're up to now. So thank you so much for taking a little bit of time to share with Scratch Entrepreneur.
Thanks for inviting me.
Special thanks to Margaret Fette for taking the time to share the Tailored Fit story and really her personal story with us. Contributors to the episode include myself, Jeremy Goodrich. I'm the host. Music is by my good friend, Mark Vinten. Editing is by superhero Christopher Lang, who we couldn't do this without. If you enjoyed the podcast, there's a couple of things we need you to do right now. First, please subscribe to Scratch Entrepreneur on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. Please do rate and review while you are there. Finally, please join us on the Scratch Entrepreneur Facebook group or over at patreon.com, where we have after shows, special resources, and a community of folks that are there talking about business ownerships and the stories of other healthy, profitable businesses that they've grown and they know about, all there at patreon.com. So until the next time, we truly appreciate you listening.